My friends all have better boyfriends than you, she announced at dinner with her friends. This happened 3 years ago, but I'm writing about it now because Keisha just showed up at my door last week asking for another chance. I'm Marcus Williams, 32 years old, and I work as a civil engineer for the city of Atlanta. My life isn't flashy, but it's stable, honest, and built on principles my grandfather taught me about hard work and integrity. I drive a reliable Honda Accord, live in a modest apartment in Decatur, and spend my weekends volunteering with a youth mentorship program at my old high school. Back then, I thought I had everything figured out, thought I'd found the woman I'd marry and build a life with. Hello friends, before I continue the story, please support the channel by becoming a subscriber and giving the video a like. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching right now. I met Keisha Thompson at a Juneteenth cookout in Piedmont Park when I was 29 and she was 27. She worked in public relations for a major hotel chain and had this presence that commanded attention the moment she walked into any room. Her laugh was loud and unapologetic, her style was impeccable, and she had ambitions that seemed to stretch beyond the Atlanta skyline. We connected over our shared love of old-school R&B and our frustration with the city's traffic. And by the end of that evening, I had her number saved in my phone. Those first 8 months together felt like something out of a romance novel, the kind my mother used to read on Sunday afternoons. Keisha appreciated everything I did for her in the beginning, or at least she seemed to. I'd surprise her with lunch at her office when I knew she had stressful presentations coming up. I'd plan dates to the High Museum or the Atlanta Botanical Garden because she'd mentioned loving art and nature. When her car broke down, I spent my Saturday helping her research reliable mechanics and making sure she didn't get overcharged. She'd call me her rock and tell her mother on the phone that she'd finally found a good man who treated her right. I felt like I was building something meaningful, laying a foundation for a future that included Sunday dinners with our families and eventually children of our own. The shift started when Keisha got close with 2 women from her networking group, Tanya and Simone. Tanya's boyfriend, Jordan, owned a chain of barber shops across the metro area and drove a Range Rover that he'd upgraded every 2 years. Simone's boyfriend, Chris, worked in pharmaceutical sales and was always posting photos from Miami, Dubai, or wherever his company sent him that month. Both of them had the kind of lifestyle that looked impressive on Instagram, all expensive dinners, designer shopping bags, and luxury weekend getaways. Keisha started coming home from their girls' nights with a different energy, a restlessness that hadn't been there before. The comments started small, barely noticeable at first, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Tanya showed me photos from their trip to Turks and Caicos. She'd say while scrolling through her phone, "The resort looked absolutely beautiful." I'd suggest we plan a trip somewhere nice, maybe Savannah or Charleston, and she'd make a face like I'd suggested we vacation at a truck stop. "Maybe somewhere more exotic," she'd respond, her voice carrying an edge of disappointment I was starting to recognize. When I'd remind her I was saving for a down payment on a house, she'd sigh and say nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. The group dinners became a monthly tradition that I started to dread with the intensity most people reserve for root canals. Jordan would pick restaurants in Buckhead where the wine list read like a mortgage payment and the portions were so small you needed a magnifying glass to find your food. Chris would show up wearing designer everything, making sure to drop brand names into every conversation like he was getting paid for product placement. I'm not broke by any means. Engineers make decent money, but I'm not about to spend a week's salary on one meal when that money could go toward building actual wealth. My grandfather grew up sharecropping in South Carolina and taught me that real wealth is what you own, not what you wear. Keisha would get quiet during these dinners, shrinking into herself while Tanya and Simone talked about their latest designer handbags or spontaneous weekend trips. I tried to contribute to conversations about sports or current events, but Jordan would somehow always redirect things back to his business expansion plans or his latest real estate investment. Chris would check his phone constantly, making a show of responding to important clients, while the rest of us waited. The worst part was watching Keisha's face as she compared my off-the-rack button-down to Jordan's custom-tailored shirts, my practical Seiko watch to Chris's Rolex. Her disappointment was so thick you could spread it on toast. "Marcus is more grounded than flashy," Keisha started telling people when they asked about our relationship. The word grounded, came out of her mouth like an apology, like she was explaining why she'd settled for a Honda when her friends drove luxury cars. She stopped posting photos of us on social media, while Tanya and Simone's pages were filled with couple shots from expensive restaurants and exotic locations. When I'd plan a romantic evening at home with her favorite meal from Busy Bee Cafe and a classic film, she'd spend the whole time on Instagram, double-tapping photos of her friends living their best lives. The woman who'd once called me her rock now looked at me like I was dead weight holding her down. The pressure to become someone I wasn't intensified over the following months, building like steam in a pressure cooker. Keisha started sending me links to luxury apartments in Midtown, cars I couldn't afford, and restaurants where reservations required booking weeks in advance. Jordan just surprised Tanya with a birthday trip to Napa Valley, she'd mentioned casually, as if it was something any normal boyfriend should be doing monthly. When I'd explain my financial priorities, paying off student loans, building savings, preparing for homeownership, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about living in the moment. Her friends became more openly condescending, with Tanya making comments about men who think small, and Simone talking about how a woman shouldn't have to lower her standards just to be in a relationship. Things reached a breaking point on a Friday evening in September at some overpriced steakhouse in Atlantic Station. We were there with Tanya, Jordan, Simone, and Chris for what Keisha had described as just a casual dinner. Though nothing about these gatherings was ever casual. Everyone ordered expensive cocktails and steaks that cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. I got the salmon and a beer, which apparently was embarrassing enough to make Keisha actually flinch when the waiter repeated my order. The tension at that table was so thick you needed a chainsaw to cut through it. Midway through dinner, Jordan announced he was taking Tanya to Paris for Fashion Week, dropping the news like he was revealing the cure for cancer. "Sometimes you've got to show your woman she's worth the investment," he said, grinning at me in a way that made my jaw tighten. Tanya squealed and started showing everyone photos of the hotel on her phone, while Keisha leaned in, her eyes widening with each swipe. I watched my girlfriend's face fall with each image of designer boutiques and Michelin-starred restaurants, watched her mentally calculating the distance between Paris and the life she had with me. The comparison was happening right there in real time, and I was losing badly. Then Chris pulled out a small box from Tiffany & Company, sliding it across the table to Simone with the smugness of a man who knew exactly how much attention this moment would command. Inside was a diamond necklace that probably cost more than I'd make in 2 months, maybe 3 if you counted taxes. Simone gasped and immediately put it on, tilting her head so everyone could see how it caught the light. "Y'all are so blessed," Keisha said, but her voice carried in bitterness I'd never heard before, sharp enough to cut glass. She ordered another Cosmopolitan, her third of the evening, and I knew we were headed somewhere dark. I tried to salvage the evening by being gracious, complimenting the necklace and saying something about how nice it looked. "Thanks, Marcus," Simone said in that patronizing tone people use when they're talking to someone they consider beneath them. "It's just important to be with a man who knows how to treat you right. You know?" Tanya nodded in agreement, adding something about how a real man makes his woman feel special every day, not just on birthdays. Jordan and Chris sat there looking pleased with themselves, like they'd just won some competition I hadn't realized we were having. The whole conversation felt like a coordinated attack, and Keisha wasn't defending me or changing the subject. She was nodding along with every word. Keisha was visibly drunk now, swaying slightly in her seat and making comments under her breath that I couldn't quite hear. When the check came, I reached for my wallet like always, preparing to cover both of our meals despite the fact that the total was going to hurt. That's when everything fell apart, when the evening went from uncomfortable to catastrophic in the span of 30 seconds. "You know what?" Keisha said loudly, her voice cutting through the ambient restaurant noise. "I'm so tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not." Every person at our table stopped mid-conversation and turned to look at her, then at me. "Keisha, what are you talking about?" I asked, though my stomach was already dropping because some part of me knew exactly where this was headed. She gestured around the table with her Cosmopolitan, some of it sloshing onto the white tablecloth. "Look around this table, Marcus," she said, her words slightly slurred but perfectly clear in their intent. "Look at what my friends have and what they get from their men." The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. Or maybe it was just that all my attention had narrowed to this one horrible moment. My friends all have better boyfriends than you, Keisha announced, her voice loud enough that nearby tables definitely heard every word. The statement hung in the air like smoke from a fire, choking everything around it. Tanya and Simone exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly not expecting their complaints about me to be voiced quite this publicly. Jordan smirked into his whiskey while Chris pulled out his phone, probably to text someone about the drama unfolding. I felt heat rising up my neck, my ears burning with a combination of humiliation and anger that I was struggling to control. Keisha, you're drunk? I said quietly, trying to give her an out. A way to walk this back before it became something we couldn't recover from. I'm drunk enough to tell the truth for once, she shot back, pointing her finger at me. Tanya gets Paris and designer bags. Simone gets jewelry and trips to Miami. And what do I get? She paused dramatically, playing to an audience that was now fully invested in our relationship's public execution. I get dinner at Houston's and promises about some house you're going to buy someday but never actually do anything about. The words felt like physical blows, each one landing with precision in places I didn't even know were vulnerable. I thought you understood what I was building toward, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought we were building it together. Keisha laughed, a harsh sound that bore no resemblance to the laugh I'd fallen in love with at that Juneteenth cookout. Building what, Marcus? A future where I watch my friends live, amazing lives, while I sit in your apartment eating takeout and watching Netflix. She was crying now, drunk tears running down her face. But there was cruelty in her eyes that alcohol didn't create, only revealed. I'm embarrassed, she continued, her voice breaking but still loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. I'm embarrassed to show up to these dinners with you when everyone else has men who actually know how to provide. The word provide hit me like a slap because I'd been providing, just not in ways that impressed her Instagram followers. I'd been providing stability, consistency, genuine care and attention, a foundation for something real. But none of that mattered when measured against Paris trips and Tiffany necklaces, against the performance of wealth that Keisha had started to value more than actual substance. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened, watching the woman I'd loved publicly reduce our 2-year relationship to a comparison shopping exercise. The entire table was silent now, even Jordan and Chris looking uncomfortable with how far this had gone. A couple at the next table was openly staring, and I could see our waiter hovering nearby, unsure whether to interrupt this disaster. My hands were shaking, so I gripped the edge of the table to steady them, taking a deep breath before I did what I knew I had to do. I reached for my wallet, pulled out enough cash to cover everyone's meals plus a generous tip for our waiter who'd had to witness this mess. I placed the money carefully in the center of the table, making sure I had enough to cover even Jordan and Chris's expensive steaks and top-shelf liquor. This should cover everything, I said quietly, standing up and straightening my shirt. My voice was calm, calmer than I felt, calm in the way you get when shock temporarily overrides emotion. Marcus, where are you going? Keisha demanded, suddenly seeming to realize that this wasn't playing out like she'd expected. Home, I said simply, looking at her directly for what I somehow knew would be one of the last times. Enjoy the rest of your evening with your friends who have better boyfriends. I nodded politely to the table, years of my grandmother's etiquette training kicking in even during my worst moment. Then I walked out of that restaurant with my head up, my shoulders back, and my dignity intact even if my heart was in pieces. The summer night air hit me like a wall when I stepped outside, humid and thick, but I welcomed it because it meant I was out of that room, away from that table, free from that humiliation. I sat in my Honda Accord in the parking garage for 20 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, replaying what had just happened. The woman I'd been planning a future with had just announced to a table full of people that I wasn't good enough for her. She'd measured everything I'd given her. My time, my attention, my effort, my love, against her friends' Instagram posts and found it all worthless. Every home-cooked meal, every thoughtful gesture, every plan I'd made for our future had been weighed on a scale that only measured monetary value. And I'd been found wanting. I drove home to my apartment in Decatur, the route so familiar I barely registered the turns I was making. I parked in my usual spot, walked up the 2 flights of stairs, unlocked my door, and stood in my living room that suddenly felt different. This was the space where I'd cooked Keisha breakfast on weekend mornings, where we'd watched movies on my moderately priced couch, where I'd imagined proposing to her someday. Now it just felt like a crime scene, evidence of a life that hadn't been enough. I poured myself 2 fingers of the bourbon my father had given me for my birthday and sat on my couch in the dark, thinking clearly for the first time in months. The realization hit me hard. I'd spent the better part of a year apologizing for being myself. I'd been made to feel inadequate for being financially responsible, for prioritizing stability over flash, for showing love through actions instead of price tags. Keisha had been comparing me to Jordan and Chris, but what she didn't understand was that I wasn't in competition with them. We were playing entirely different games with different rules and different definitions of winning. They were performing wealth. I was building it. Keisha came home around 1 in the morning, stumbling drunk and apparently expecting me to take care of her like nothing had happened. "Marcus, baby, you still up?" she called out, her voice syrupy in that way drunk people think is endearing. I was lying in bed with the lights off, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. "I think I drank too much," she continued, bumping into furniture in the dark. Those cosmos were stronger than I thought. The audacity of her pretending the evening had been nothing more than overindulgence was almost impressive in its delusion. I didn't respond, just kept my breathing steady and pretended to be asleep. She eventually gave up and crashed on the couch, and I lay there planning my next steps until the sun came up. The next morning, Keisha acted like the previous night had never happened, making coffee and humming while she scrolled through her phone. She asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market later, mentioned a new brunch spot Tanya had recommended, chatted about her week ahead at work. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She'd publicly humiliated me less than 12 hours ago and now wanted to discuss our weekend plans. "About last night," I finally said, my voice flat and emotionless. "What about it?" she asked, not even looking up from her phone. "What you said at dinner, about your friends having better boyfriends." She waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away a mosquito. "Marcus, I was drunk, okay?" she said, still not meeting my eyes. "You know I didn't mean it like that." But she did mean it exactly like that and probably worse. I could see it in the way she still wouldn't look at me, in the casual dismissal, in her complete lack of understanding about what she'd done. "I think I'm going to stay at my boy Devin's place for a few days," I said, my tone making it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "We both need some space to think about what we really want." Now she looked up, her eyes widening with something that might have been panic or might have been annoyance. "Marcus, you're being dramatic," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing quality I'd heard too often lately. I said I was sorry, except she hadn't said she was sorry, hadn't apologized at all, had just minimized what happened and expected me to get over it. "I'll call you in a few days," I said, already heading toward the bedroom to pack a bag. The calls and texts started within hours of me leaving, Keisha's emotional progression playing out across my phone screen. First came annoyance. "You're really going to blow this out of proportion?" Then anger. "It's not fair for you to just leave without working this out like adults." By day 3, panic had set in. "Marcus, please, we need to talk." By day 5, desperation. "I miss you, baby. Please come home." I read every message but didn't respond, spending that week at Devin's apartment doing something I should have done months ago, really thinking about my relationship without Keisha's presence clouding my judgment. Devin, my boy since college, didn't pull punches. "Man, she's been treating you like a backup option for months now," he said one evening while we watched the Braves game. "Every time you talk about her, it's about something you're not doing good enough." He was right, and hearing it from someone outside the situation made it impossible to deny. I'd been bending myself into shapes that didn't fit, trying to become flashier, less practical, more performative, trying to be Jordan or Chris instead of just being Marcus. And for what? To keep a woman who was embarrassed to be with me? That Saturday, I went back to the apartment while Keisha was at her regular Saturday spin class. I packed everything that mattered: clothes, books, my grandfather's old record player, photos of my family, the coffee maker I'd brought into the relationship. I left the key on the kitchen counter next to a note that said simply, "I deserve better than this." 3 words that somehow contained everything I needed to say. No anger, no long explanation, just a basic statement of fact that had taken me too long to recognize. I deserve better than being someone's embarrassment. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Grant Park and moved in that weekend. The place small but mine, free from comparisons and judgment. I changed my number and blocked Keisha on all social media, told my family and friends that we'd broken up and I didn't want to discuss it further. My mother, who'd never particularly warmed to Keisha anyway, just said, "About time, baby," and offered to help me decorate my new place. My father took me to lunch and told me a story about a woman he'd dated before my mother who'd made him feel small, and how leaving her had been the best decision he'd ever made. The support felt like medicine for wounds I hadn't realized were so deep. Devin told me Keisha lost her mind when she came home to find me and my stuff gone. She called him crying, begging for my new number, saying she'd made a terrible mistake and needed to talk to me. She showed up at my job, but I'd already requested and received a transfer to the city's North Fulton office, a move that came with a slight promotion and better hours. For the first few months, she tried everything. Had Tanya and Simone reach out on social media, sent messages through mutual friends, even had her mother call my mother asking for me to give Keisha another chance. I didn't respond to any of it, had learned that the best response to someone who didn't respect you was absolute silence. The truth was, after the initial heartbreak faded, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done, finished with that chapter, ready to turn the page. Keisha had shown me exactly who she was and what she valued, and I'd finally done her the courtesy of believing her. There's no coming back from being called an embarrassment, from having your love compared unfavorably to Paris trips and Tiffany necklaces, from having someone announce publicly that you're not good enough. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. I threw myself into work and life with an energy I hadn't felt in years, like I'd been carrying a heavy weight I didn't realize was there until I set it down. The promotion at work led to another one 6 months later when I headed up a major infrastructure project that came in under budget and ahead of schedule. I started working out regularly at the gym near my apartment, not to look like anyone else but because it felt good to challenge myself physically. I joined a weekend basketball league with Devin and some other guys, rediscovering how much I enjoyed just playing for fun without any pressure. The youth mentorship program I volunteered with asked me to join their board of directors, and I said yes, finding purpose in helping young black men navigate the same pressures I'd faced. Through Devin and other friends, I heard pieces of information about Keisha's post-breakup life, fragments of a story I was no longer part of. She'd apparently thrown herself into dating apps with aggressive determination, trying to find the upgrade she'd convinced herself existed. She went out with finance guys, entrepreneurs, men with luxury cars and expensive watches, all the surface-level markers she'd decided mattered. From what Devin heard through his girlfriend, who was still cordial with Simone, it wasn't going well. One guy turned out to be running a scam, another was married with 2 kids in Marietta, a third expected things she wasn't willing to give just because he'd paid for an expensive meal. She keeps complaining that good men don't exist anymore. Devin's girlfriend Jasmine told me one day when I ran into her at Trader Joe's. Says all men are players or broke or just looking for hookups. I felt a brief flash of sympathy, remembering the woman I'd loved before she'd gotten lost in comparisons. Then I remembered sitting in that Atlantic Station restaurant, listening to Keisha announce my inadequacy to an audience, and the sympathy evaporated. "That's tough," I said neutrally, loading organic vegetables into my basket. "Hope she finds what she's looking for." I meant it genuinely. I hope she did find whatever it was she thought would make her happy, as long as it had nothing to do with me. About a year and a half after the breakup, the friend group Keisha had valued so much started imploding in spectacular fashion. Jordan, the Range Rover driving barbershop owner, got caught cheating on Tanya with one of his employees, and it turned out his business expansion was mostly financed by debt he couldn't afford. When Tanya dumped him, he had to sell 2 of his 3 shops just to stay afloat, and the Range Rover got repossessed. Tanya posted the whole messy story on Facebook, and it spread through our social circles like wildfire. Suddenly Jordan wasn't looking like such a catch anymore. Chris, the pharmaceutical sales boyfriend with the Rolex and the Dubai photos, turned out to be involved in some shady business practices that got him fired. Simone discovered that most of his wealth was a carefully constructed illusion built on credit cards and loans, and that the Tiffany necklace he'd given her was fake. She dumped him and had to spend months untangling the financial mess he'd created, including credit cards he'd taken out in her name. Devin showed me the Instagram posts Simone made about it, warning other women about men who sell dreams they can't afford. The irony was so thick you could spread it with a knife. Suddenly Keisha's "my friends all have better boyfriends" situation didn't look so appealing, and the whole comparison game had revealed itself for the illusion it was. I felt vindicated but also sad. Sad for the time I'd wasted trying to measure up to frauds. I started dating again about 2 years after the breakup. Nothing serious at first, just meeting women for coffee or dinner and seeing if we connected. It was refreshing to meet women who appreciated thoughtfulness over expense, who valued conversation over Instagram moments, who understood that a man showing up consistently was worth more than a man showing up with expensive gifts occasionally. One woman I dated briefly told me I was refreshingly normal, which I took as the compliment it was meant to be. That's how I met Ayana. I was at Spellman's homecoming with Devin, who dragged me along despite my protests about being too old for college parties. We were standing in line at a food truck when the woman in front of me turned around and we nearly collided. "I'm so sorry," she said, laughing and steadying the plate of wings she was carrying. "These lines make you move in weird patterns." "No worries," I said, smiling. "Those wings worth the wait?" She was wearing a Spellman sweatshirt and had her locks tied up in a colorful wrap. "Absolutely. I graduated 5 years ago and I still dream about these wings sometimes," she said. We started talking and I learned she was back for homecoming, that she taught history at a high school in Southwest Atlanta. "What do you do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'm a civil engineer for the city," I told her. "I work on infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, water systems." Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "That's amazing. So you're literally building the city we all live in. Not is that boring? Or do you make good money?" Just genuine appreciation for work that mattered. We talked for an hour, then exchanged numbers, then went on a real date the following week. Ayana appreciated everything about me that Keisha had found embarrassing or inadequate, and being with her felt like finally being able to breathe fully. When I brought her flowers from Trader Joe's, she'd put them in a vase and tell me they brightened her whole week. When I cooked dinner for her after a long day of dealing with teenagers and district bureaucracy, she'd say it was the most thoughtful thing anyone had done for her in months. We'd spend weekend mornings at the farmer's market, then come back to my apartment and cook together, talking about everything from our families to our dreams to the state of Atlanta traffic. She made more than Keisha had as a teacher, but she got excited about our low-key dates. Hiking at Arabia Mountain, concerts at Chastain Park, cooking competitions in my kitchen where we'd each try to make the best version of our grandmother's recipes. With Ayana, being myself wasn't just acceptable, it was celebrated, and I felt like I'd been living in black and white and suddenly the world was in color. She loved that I was responsible with money, said it showed I was thinking about the future. She appreciated that I volunteered with young people, told me it demonstrated character and values. When I talked about my goal of eventually starting my own engineering consulting firm, she got excited and started asking questions about my business plan. 6 months into dating her, I realized this was what a real partnership felt like. Two people building something together, appreciating each other's strengths, supporting each other's growth. I proposed to Ayana on a Saturday afternoon 18 months into our relationship, at the site of a community center I'd helped design in the neighborhood where I grew up. We'd just finished a volunteer session with the youth mentorship program, and I took her to see the building that would break ground in a few months. "This is where it all started for me," I told her, showing her the plans. "This community, these people, they made me who I am." She was looking at the blueprints with genuine interest when I got down on one knee. "Ayana, you make me feel like the man I always wanted to be," I said. "Will you marry me?" She said yes before I could even get the ring out of my pocket. Planning our engagement party was completely different from anything I'd experienced with Keisha, filled with joy instead of anxiety, celebration instead of competition. Ayana wanted something simple and meaningful, Good food, people we loved, music that made you want to dance, celebrating the fact that we'd found each other in a city of millions. We decided on a backyard party at Devin's house in East Atlanta. Nothing fancy, just about 40 people who mattered to us. My parents flew in from South Carolina. Her family came from Columbus. And our friends filled Devin's yard with laughter and music. I couldn't stop smiling, watching Ayanna in her yellow sundress talking with my mother about wedding plans, seeing my father and her father bonding over their shared love of fishing. I was refilling the cooler with ice when I saw someone standing by Devin's side gate, looking uncertain and out of place. My stomach dropped when I recognized Keisha, wearing a cocktail dress that was way too formal for a backyard party, holding a wrapped gift. She looked different, older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, her confidence replaced by something that looked like desperation. I walked over before she could get any closer to the party, my heart pounding but my mind clear. "Hi, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the music playing in the backyard. "Congratulations on your engagement," I heard through the grapevine. "Thank you, Keisha," I said, keeping my voice neutral and my body positioned between her and the party. "But you can't be here, you understand that, right?" She nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. I know I shouldn't have come," she said. "I just saw Devin's girlfriend post something on Instagram with the address, and I thought maybe I could just drop off a gift." I glanced back at the party where Ayanna was now talking with my sister, both of them laughing about something, completely unaware of the ghost from my past standing 20 feet away. "How did you even get Devin's address?" I asked, though it didn't really matter. "I just wanted to say congratulations in person," Keisha continued, ignoring my question. "And to tell you that I'm happy for you, Marcus. You look really happy." "I am happy," I said simply, not bothering to soften it. "Which is why you need to leave right now before this becomes a situation." She shifted the gift from one hand to the other, looking like she wanted to say more. "Can I just meet her?" she asked. "Just for a minute. Just to say congratulations to you both?" The audacity of the request would have been funny if it wasn't so inappropriate. "Absolutely not," I said firmly, my voice harder now. "Keisha, you need to leave. This isn't your place and you know it." She started crying for real now, tears running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. "I know things ended badly between us," she said, her voice breaking. "But I've changed, Marcus. I've grown up a lot since then." I studied her face, seeing the regret there but feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a mild frustration that she was disrupting my perfect evening. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad you've grown. But that doesn't change anything between us." "Doesn't it though?" she pressed, taking a step closer. "We had something real before I messed it up. Before I let my friends get in my head and make me forget what actually mattered." I looked at her for a long moment, then back at Ayanna, who was now dancing with Devin's girlfriend. "We never had anything real, Keisha," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Real relationships don't involve public humiliation. Real love doesn't come with conditions about cars and restaurants and how you measure up to other people." I watched her face crumple at the words, but I'd learned that the truth doesn't become less true just because it hurts. "I was young and stupid," she said desperately. "I didn't know what I had, didn't understand what real love looked like until I lost it." "You knew," I said. "You just decided I wasn't worth it. That Paris trips mattered more than partnership. That Instagram posts mattered more than integrity." The music from the party shifted to an old Frankie Beverly song, and I could hear people singing along. "I should have defended you," Keisha said. "I should have told Tanya and Simone to back off. Should have appreciated everything you were doing instead of comparing you to their boyfriends who turned out to be frauds anyway." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in your priorities." I could see her trying to find the right words, the magic phrase that would somehow undo 3 years of growth and healing. "Is there any chance?" she started. "No," I said, cutting her off before she could finish. "There's no chance, Keisha. That door closed 3 years ago and it's staying closed." She nodded, accepting what she must have known before she came here. I really am sorry, she said. For everything, for how I treated you, for what I said that night, for not seeing what I had until it was gone. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. But apologies don't erase what happened. Don't change the fact that you made me feel worthless for being exactly who I am. I gestured toward my Honda, still parked in the same spot where it had always been. I'm still driving the same car, still living modestly, still prioritizing stability over flash, I continued. The only difference is now I'm with someone who loves me for it instead of being embarrassed by it. Keisha flinched at the word embarrassed, and I realized she remembered that night as clearly as I did. She's a lucky woman, Keisha said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. No, I corrected. I'm a lucky man. Lucky to have found someone who sees my worth, who understands what I'm building, who wants to build it with me. The difference in those perspectives, her seeing Ayana as lucky, me seeing myself as lucky, summed up everything that had been wrong with our relationship. Keisha had always positioned herself as the prize I should be grateful to have won, never understanding that love is supposed to be mutual appreciation, not a one-sided pursuit. I should go, she said finally, still holding that gift that I wasn't going to accept. Yes, you should, I agreed. I hope you find what you're looking for, Keisha. I genuinely do. I watched her walk back to her car, a silver Lexus that probably represented the upgrade she thought she wanted. She drove away slowly, and I stood there for a moment, processing the fact that seeing her had stirred absolutely nothing in me except mild annoyance at the interruption. Then I walked back to the party, to the life I'd built from the ashes of that humiliating dinner 3 years ago. I found Ayana and pulled her into a dance, and she looked up at me with eyes full of love and asked if everything was okay. Everything's perfect, I said, and it was. Who was at the gate? She asked later that evening when most of the guests had left and we were helping Devin clean up. Just someone from my past. I told her honestly. Nobody important. Nobody who matters to our future. Ayana nodded, trusting me enough not to press for details, and that trust felt like the most precious gift I'd ever received. We finished cleaning up, said our goodbyes, and drove back to my apartment where wedding magazines were already scattered across the coffee table. That night, lying in bed with Ayana asleep beside me, I thought about the journey from that restaurant in Atlantic Station to this moment. I thought about how Keisha's cruelty had forced me to examine what I truly valued, to stop apologizing for being myself, to understand my own worth. I thought about how her rejection had cleared the path for me to find someone who celebrated everything about me instead of trying to change it. In a strange way, I was grateful to her for showing me her true self that night, for making the break so definitive that there was no going back, no lingering what-ifs. The wedding happened 6 months later at a historic venue in Grant Park. Simple but beautiful, filled with people who loved us. My grandfather, 92 years old and still sharp as a tack, gave a toast about how a man who knows himself can't be shaken by anyone else's opinion. Ayana's grandmother talked about how rare it is to find someone whose values align with your own, how that alignment is the foundation of lasting love. Devin gave a speech about watching me go through hell and come out stronger, about seeing me find the kind of love everyone deserves. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine. I heard later, through the grapevine that never quite dies in Atlanta's Black community, that Keisha had shown up at the venue but didn't come in. Someone saw her sitting in her car in the parking lot for about 20 minutes before driving away. Part of me felt sad for her, stuck in a moment that I'd long since moved past. But mostly I just felt grateful for Ayana, for the life we were building, for the lessons I'd learned from my past. You can't build a future looking backward, can't create something real while chasing illusions. Ayana and I honeymooned in New Orleans, a city we both loved for its history and culture and food. We spent a week eating our way through the French Quarter, listening to jazz in tiny clubs, talking about the house we wanted to buy and the children we hoped to have someday. Every moment felt easy and right, two people who'd found each other and recognized something worth keeping. On our last night, sitting on our hotel balcony overlooking Bourbon Street, Ayana asked me if I'd ever imagined being this happy. Not until I met you, I told her honestly. We've been married now for 8 months. living in a house we bought together in Kirkwood. The mortgage is manageable because we were patient, because we saved and planned and didn't try to keep up with anyone else's lifestyle. We cook together most nights, host game nights with friends, volunteer together with the youth program. Ayana is pregnant with our first child, a daughter we're naming after my grandmother who passed last spring. My engineering consulting firm is getting off the ground with 3 clients already lined up. Life is good, real, built on substance instead of show. I saw Keisha one more time at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland about a month ago. She was sitting alone, scrolling through her phone, and didn't notice me at first. She looked tired, older than she should at 31, like life had worn her down. I could have left without saying anything, probably should have, but something made me walk over, some impulse toward closure or kindness. "Hi, Keisha," I said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and a complicated series of emotions crossed her face. Surprise, embarrassment, sadness, something else I couldn't quite name. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm good," I said. "Really good. Married life is treating me well." I showed her the photo on my phone of Ayana, her hand on her growing belly, both of us grinning at the camera. "Congratulations," she said, and I could hear that she meant it. "She's beautiful. You both look really happy." "We are," I confirmed. "How are you doing?" It was a genuine question, not asked out of smugness or revenge, just human curiosity. "I'm okay," she said, though her eyes told a different story. "Still figuring things out. Still learning lessons I should have learned years ago." There was a pause, heavy with everything unsaid. "I really am sorry, Marcus," she said, "for what I said, for how I treated you, for not realizing until too late what actually matters." "I know," I said, "and I forgive you, Keisha. Holding on to anger doesn't serve either of us." I meant it too, had worked through the resentment in therapy and prayer and long conversations with Ayana. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean we can be friends or stay in touch. She nodded, understanding. "I just hope you're happy," she said. "I hope you find someone who sees you the way I should have." "I hope so too," I said sincerely. We said our goodbyes, and I left her there in that coffee shop, a ghost from a past I'd fully laid to rest. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter somehow, like that final conversation had closed a chapter one didn't even realize was still open. I drove home to Ayana, to our house, to our life, to our future. That evening, she asked me why I seemed so peaceful. "I ran into Keisha today," I told her, "and I realized I don't feel anything when I see her. Not anger, not satisfaction, nothing." "Is that a good thing?" Anna asked. "It's a great thing," I said. "It means I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Thank you for watching all the way through. There's another story to your left screen. You'll enjoy it more than this one.